Good afternoon, everyone. This is Teresa Campisi from the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. And today you are participating in the Implementing CCDF Criminal Background Check Requirements webinar. A few housekeeping things to go over. Everyone is on mute today because we do have a large number of participants, but we do encourage you to use the questions box to ask any questions that you have for the presenters. We're not sure that we'll get to any questions or all questions today, but we'll certainly make sure to pass on the questions after the webinar. We have a very packed agenda, as you'll see in a few slides, but without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Shannon.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Shannon Christian. I'm the Director of the Office of Child Care, and we oversee this project for ACF. Unfortunately, our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Steve Wagner, was called away at the last minute to meet with the Secretary, so he's going to be a little late joining the call. We've shifted him to the end so he can make closing remarks. But he's been providing the leadership and support for meeting the background check requirements since his arrival at the department in May of 2017, and I am hoping that he does make it to the call so he can weigh in. But nonetheless, I am pleased to welcome you today to this important webinar. It's exciting for us to have the opportunity to address the various groups who together have the power to make the comprehensive background check process a reality. The background check requirements are a key provision of the bipartisan reauthorization of the 2014 Child Care and Development Block Grant, and they've turned out to be the toughest challenge. The CCDBG Act aims to protect children's safety by ensuring that checks are comprehensive and cover all staff. Because of the comprehensive nature of the background checks, successful implementation demands partnerships across multiple state agencies, which is a focus of our webinar today. And although specific roles vary by state, strong state partnerships typically include child care subsidy and child care licensing agencies who are responsible for coordinating the checks and making determinations about whether individuals are disqualified, and also then child welfare agencies that maintain child care and neglect registries. It's child abuse and neglect registries. Sorry, I have a mistake in my notes. At least my brain stopped us. Okay, maintain child abuse and neglect registries, and criminal justice and law enforcement agencies and entities that may handle aspects of fingerprinting and house or have access to the criminal justice and sex offender records. Those are sort of the key partners, but they're often even more than that. So we've invited many of these groups to today's webinar, and we're pleased that hundreds, well, at least over 200, are joining us. We're delighted that a number of state human service commissioners or their representatives are on the webinar, and many of those have responsibility for both child care and child abuse and neglect. We're asking that these commissioners and others in senior state leadership positions help promote connections and collaboration across entities, which is sort of the inspiration for this call, because we figure the more of us who know about it, the easier it's going to be to collaborate. So thank you all for coming. It's worth noting that other human service programs, in addition to child care, have their own background check requirements. And we're hoping that working together, we can accomplish these checks more efficiently and effectively together. ACF recognizes the significant challenges in implementing the new components of the checks, particularly in light of the large volume of child care staff and the needs for timely results. And that's why we gave states as much time as allowed under the law to implement the most difficult parts, including the interstate checks, essentially splitting the requirements across two deadlines. By September 30 of last year, 2018, we required states to meet specific milestones to ensure that protections were in place while states continued to work on implementation needed to meet the more challenging pieces by September 30, 2020. States have made significant progress. 37 states have implemented the FBI fingerprint and in-state checks for new staff. At the same time, work remains to be done and it's important to recognize that states who fail to meet the requirements are subject to a penalty of 5% of their discretionary child care funds. So we're just thinking, well, how much is that? A 5% penalty would range from our smallest state, which would be a penalty of $300,000 to approximately $27 million in the largest allocation state, California. So you all are somewhere in between or at one of those ends. And so it could be a lot of money, and we don't want you to be in that position. The 40% increase in child care funding that states received in fiscal year 2018 and that was maintained in fiscal year 2019 should assist states in meeting the requirements. So there is a bump in funding to help offset these tough requirements. Congress appropriated these funds with the expectation that it would enable states to achieve full compliance, including with the background checks. States can use these funds for staffing or infrastructure to support background checks, such as fingerprinting equipment or other IT investments. And then we're going to get in the weeds for a second. Many of these expenses may be reported as quality improvement activities that can help states meet newly increased quality spending requirements under the law. The quality expenditures do not count against the state's child care administrative cost cap. So these are just ways for those of you who have the money to help others and yourselves get this done. In addition, many states are well below their administrative cost cap and have room to make additional investments to ensure adequate staffing and infrastructure, not only for background checks, but for administering the child care subsidy program more broadly. As we're all too aware, probably, child care plays a critical role in both early childhood development and in parents' ability to hold a job. It's important that state leaders support CCDF or CCDBG, whatever we're calling it today, with the resources and resolve needed to meet program goals and requirements. This includes recognizing the program's broad scope and complexity, as well as its flexibility and opportunity to make a difference in the lives of children and families, employers, and the community. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to Andrew Williams, who heads up our policy division in the Office of Child Care. Andrew has the lead on the comprehensive background check efforts. Andrew?
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks to everyone for joining the webinar, and particularly our presenters. And we just wanted to briefly mention that this spring, the Office of Child Care will be hosting meetings in all of our regional offices that include sessions on background check requirements. And in many cases, state child care administrators will be inviting their key state partners to attend, and we encourage your participation. CCDF funds can be used to support travel, and we hope that it will be a good opportunity to strengthen your own state team, as well as to learn from the practices and experiences of other states. And so we're hoping that today's call will get us off on that track. And as a first step, we'll be hearing from two states on today's webinar, Louisiana and Michigan. So thank you again for joining us. And I'm now going to turn the webinar over to Teresa Campisi with our National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability.
Okay, thanks so much, Andrew. See if I can move the slide forward. Okay. So on the screen now, you should be able to see the agenda. And although there's only 4 bullet points, it's a very packed agenda, like I said earlier. So like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the questions box, but we may or may not be able to get to them. So as Andrew stated, we will be hearing from Louisiana and Michigan. We'll also hear from the FBI regarding the National Fingerprint File, and we'll hear from ACF and OPRE research project on child care interstate background checks. And then finally, we'd like to introduce the CCDF background check implementation planning checklist. So hopefully this screen or this background check requirement highlights document looks familiar to you. This document summarizes key points of the background check requirements, and I'm only going to take a few moments to review it. You'll notice the different boxes in this document review the applicability of rules, individuals subject to background checks, and the required national and state-based background checks, as well as some additional requirements around background checks being completed every 5 years, timeliness of background checks, and supervision of provisional employees. As a reminder, a comprehensive background check includes multiple components and specific checks not previously used, including interstate checks. It includes both criminal and sex offender records and child abuse and neglect records. They must be conducted both for staff of child care providers receiving CCDF subsidies, as well as for all providers that are licensed, regulated, or registered by the state. And they must be timely in order for providers to move forward with hiring decisions and to maintain required child-staff ratios. And this requires interagency solutions across child care, child welfare, and criminal justice, which is hopefully what we'll hear about today. So I'd like to introduce our first state presenter, Valerie Black. Valerie is a senior manager from the Louisiana Department of Education and will discuss their collaboration process in Louisiana.
Hi, everyone. It's Valerie Black, as she said, from Louisiana Department of Education. And I'll just give you a little rundown of our experience, which is likely unique to Louisiana, but hopefully wherever I can, it'll be helpful for you in creating your background check implementation. So yeah, prior to the reauthorization of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act, Louisiana Department of Education did not actively process background checks, so we didn't have a child care criminal background check team, and we didn't really have an active involvement in it as far as the processing. So providers would go straight to law enforcement agency, and at that time we did have the fingerprint-based background check, but it only went to the state criminal. It only requested the state criminal history information. And so if someone had lived in another state, we did not take that extra step that we do now to check that state's criminal history. And it also didn't go to the FBI. And then as far as the child abuse and neglect registry, we had previously mandated a self-disclosure, so voluntary state central registry form, and they'd fill it out and say whether or not they were not listed on the state central registry. And then we had additional steps if they said they were. But so that, and we would check that upon licensing inspection, upon renewal, whenever we had a center apply for to be licensed, so an initial application. And of course, the state policy also forbade a person from being listed on the state sex offender registry, which is a public-facing website. But again, we didn't actively process background checks like we do now. And so now it's very different. Now the first stop the provider goes to isn't law enforcement, it's straight to us, LDOE. And so we take the lead on the processing, and we conduct the 5 background checks, and we do the out-of-state checks to the extent possible. We're able to do more and more of those as other states get on board. And we started this process, it launched March 1st, 2018, so we just celebrated our anniversary. And then we had this transition period between March and September of new hires. It applied immediately to all new hires. And then from March and September, we had a transition period to get all of the existing staff, existing contractors, existing service providers on board by September 30th. And so this is just a closer look at the implementation timeline, summarized as much as I could within a slide. 2016 is the year that I was brought on board, and that year was a lot of engagements with stakeholders, with community networks, of course our child care service providers and partner agencies. So it doesn't just apply to child care owners. It applied to people that provide extracurricular activities in early learning centers, whether it's gymnastics or soccer activities or teaching Spanish classes. It applies to people that go in for mental health consultations or speech therapists and things like that. And so, engagement was extensive, and I don't know if we could ever do enough engagement because of how many people provide services that were affected by the background checks. So we did do a lot of engagement throughout the years, giving people a heads up that this is coming. Okay, now we're serious, it's really coming soon. And then, okay, it's here, guys, it's just around the corner. And so we did that throughout the process. We did road shows, we did newsletters, we mailed postcards out, mass emails, and we did as much as we could to really let the field know that that these big changes were coming. Of course, we also had to work with people that were directly involved. So our partner agencies were Louisiana State Police, the Department of Children and Family Services, which runs our central registry, and make sure that everyone that was directly involved knew that it was coming and started working with us on what it meant for them, switching over and doing these checks with us. 2016 is when we did legislation changes to request that we can check the FBI with the same fingerprint that we use for checking the state criminal repository. And then once we figured out that we were going to need more changes and what those changes look like, we did additional legislative changes in 2017. That's also the year we brought on more people and created the Child Care Criminal Background Check team. And I'll go into that on a later slide, what that looked like for us. And we started designing our system. We started a new system, Child Care Criminal Background Checks. And we designed the system as best as we could to streamline the process, because when we were doing our engagements, we found a lot of people were terrified that we would have a slower process because there were more checks, and now there was another state agency involved. And so we designed our system to very much overcome that obstacle. And so we have one system that once a person inputs one application, that application form is used for all of the checks. So it interfaces with our fingerprint vendor. It interfaces with a side that our Department of Children and Family Services has access to so that they can check the state central registry. It interfaces with the state police, and they check through them. We link to the check the National Sex Offender Registry, and it interfaces with the Louisiana Sex Offender Registry, so that with that one form, that one stop, we can make all of those checks in as much as real time as possible to get these applications processed quickly. So the design of the system was definitely something that took some time, but also worthwhile, and where we were really able to get the support of providers and others, that these changes, albeit cost more than the old way, were going to be better in the end, not just for obviously the number one goal, children's safety, but also for them as small businesses in an industry with a high turnover. And so then through March through August, that's when we really started. That's when we started processing, right? So March 1st, all new hires had to get the background check this way. The old way went away. And then we started phasing in the existing staff. And we did that by directors and owners first. And then we did people that had been there, I think it was over 5 years, did it within a certain couple months. And then it was people that had been there between 2 to 3 years. And then at the end, it was like people that had been there 2 years or less. And we did it that way because of the high turnover rate. Usually it was people that had been in the same center forever, or they were relatively new and the director didn't think they were going to stay long. And so that was the transition period. That was the transition technique that worked for us. Again, Louisiana might be unique to other states. We tossed around some other ideas, but they all seem to have some flaws. And then September 30th is when we started processing with those hard deadlines and really started getting on providers and saying, look, we gave you quite a few years to get on board, to check your newsletters. And so that's when we really started, being a little harsher on enforcing all of this, making sure that they got in and got their background checks. We would run reports and see who hadn't gotten it and make sure that they got it done. And we also had an incentive getting it done by September 30th. And so that helped as well, us meet our deadline. So for partner interactions, we're very lucky, and I don't know how it's set up in other states, but the Louisiana State Police here, we worked with the captain and the lieutenant, and they were part of the unit for the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Information. And so through working directly with Louisiana State Police, we were able to coordinate checking for the FBI criminal repository, the state criminal repository. They helped us with the access for the NCIC to check the National Sex Offender Registry. And they also maintain the Offender Watch for checking the Louisiana sex offender registries. And so that was definitely a big chunk of the checks, right? And but a lot of it was also very technical. So we heavily involved the Office of Technological Services here in Louisiana that's just oversees all technical services. And so they were a big part of us implementing this too. And so for the Office of Technological Services, most meetings were attended by the deputy director, a program manager, and then when we really started getting into the weeds of the IT world, we had the IT project leader. And when we were talking about CJIS compliance, FBI security compliance, then we also had the Louisiana CJIS security officer attending meetings, answering our questions when it came to making sure that we were complying with the security policies. Originally we were meeting monthly, and then that graduated to weekly, but of course we also had emails between then and frequent emails, phone calls, things like that as issues arose. And towards the end, we definitely spent more time than not on the phone with each other while we were launching this and coming up with issues along the way once we started getting closer and closer to March 1st. And as far as who was a part of it at LDOE, originally it was the chief of staff at the time, that was Lisa Brochard, and someone from legal. And then when I came on board as the program manager, they very much made sure I was ready, and little by little let me fly out of the nest, and then I would include them as needed and as issues arose. But a lot of these decisions are huge, and so I'm going to say more often than not, Lisa Brochard was a part of it as the chief of staff. And then we also did one thing that was nice and helpful, and it only took 2-3 meetings. We met with the president of the Clerk of Court Association here in Louisiana, and we just let them know what we were doing and why they might start getting a lot of phone calls from the Department of Ed looking for missing dispositions. And so they helped us. They had a conference, and they told all the clerk of courts that attended that conference that we would be making these phone calls and or faxes or letters or whatever their process would be, so that they were just a little easier on us for calling and trying to get these missing dispositions. And then the other aspect of the background check is checking the Louisiana Child Abuse and Neglect Registry, and as I mentioned, that's maintained by the Department of Children and Family Services. So we met with DCFS probably about quarterly in 2016, just enough to say where we are at with our timelines, what we thought it would look like, what legislation changes we would need, what they would need. And then it went probably monthly in 2017, but of course communicating when we needed to between then, and then bi-monthly in 2018. And we tried to keep them informed as far as what our form would look like, what law changes we had. They were a big part of our online system, designing it, because, as I mentioned, the forms would go real time to a portal, a part of our system where DCFS could log in and get these applications real time. So it was very important to us that they have a form in the format that they're okay with, that we asked the right questions, got the information that they would need, so that they could do their searches as efficiently as possible, and they had everything they need. So, for instance, state police might not need aliases for conducting a background check, but DCFS might find aliases helpful or even necessary. So that's just an example, but we really wanted to make sure that they were involved and were aware of all of our details. Another reason why partner agencies were heavily involved was making sure that they felt comfortable in these checks, that they understood the process. So were our consent and disclosure forms going to be okay for them? Did they need to add any legal language? Things like that. And then it was also important for all of our partner agencies to understand what we would be giving, what information we would be disseminating. So is the provider going to get a copy of the rap sheet? No, they're going to get eligible or ineligible. How is the applicant going to receive their offenses and things like that, just to make sure that all the partner agencies were on board and comfortable with the entire process was really important. And so this slide kind of goes into greater detail of what our team looks like. Now, Louisiana is obviously not as big and populated as other states. And so this is what my team has. And it's also based on our system and, you know, what we need. We're thankfully have this system that was designed to be very streamlined, so we get to run with a pretty small group of processors. So it's currently me, the CBC program manager, and I lead on just kind of higher level things, staffing needs, policy needs. I'll check in with our chief of staff and executive director when there's any policy concerns, if any. And then I make determinations of eligibility after there's been a recommendation from the social service analyst. And I will mention that I do have a legal background, and so that's very helpful, as does my program specialist. She's an attorney, and that's helpful because we do know when to elevate something to legal and when there's actually an issue and when there's not. We also can work with these crimes and look at other crimes from other states and see if something's actually prohibited or not, and things like that. So that's, you know, something that I'm very grateful to have. My law degree, but also a program specialist with a law degree. And it's super helpful because we're both notaries. And so when it comes to out-of-state checks, we can notarize whenever it's needed, depending on the state. So my program specialist, she's really great at, she acquires the missing dispositions for us and does kind of extra research as needed. And then she helps with my supervising the other staff. And I do have an administrative coordinator. I pulled this person. This person used to be a processor, and I actually pulled her to work specifically on out-of-state processes because I feel it's more streamlined when when it's one person, or if you're a larger state, maybe a couple people, to work the out-of-state processes, to make sure the forms are filled out correctly, to work with finance, because in Louisiana we generally end up paying the out-of-state costs for other states. But the administrative coordinator also mails the documents, makes phone calls, follows up with applicants if they didn't return forms, so that we can get the out-of-state processes done timely. And then the social service analysts, they review the applications initially. They make sure that the attachments are correct. They check all the results, and they make a recommendation for me when I review the applications. And so, of course, I didn't, you know, we had about, I think right now we have about 36,000 applications completed. And so that's just how, you know, where we are as far as population and people in the child care industry. And so that's been a year. In the first couple months, when we had a really high volume of applications, We did pull in additional staff, some temporary staff, and people from other sections that we're familiar with or trainable, so to help us with the processing. And so that was needed, and then as the need dropped, then we let go of the temporary staff or put them back in their sections where they belonged. And so that was helpful for the first couple months, definitely getting the backlog manageable. And then what we also did was communicated heavily with other sections within the department. And I'm going to say that I wish I did this more. I don't know if I could ever do this enough. You know, not just about what we were doing, but what they were doing. And so, you know, I can definitely say that we want to make sure the call center knew what was happening, our help desk knew what was happening, people that worked directly with lead agencies and different networks, so that, because a lot of providers and directors just go to who they know within the department, not necessarily the correct person. And so it would have been great to have everyone just as informed as me, and maybe that's just not possible. But I did do my best here, but I wish I could have done better. Just a little hindsight there. And then I will take a moment, well, that's my last slide, and I probably do talk fast, to let you know about some implementation challenges. I'm going to say one of the implementation challenges we had is forms. Our application form, as I mentioned, we only have one online application form, and it goes to all the 5 different checks. Trying to get this form in a place where it was acceptable, it had all of the exact fields that the FBI needed, state police needed, were acceptable for the NCIC check, were acceptable for the Offender Watch check, and for DCFS. That was a very important step that took just a little bit longer than I realized, just trying to get all of the forms exactly how they needed to be, the drop downs, exactly what was acceptable and what wasn't. And then also making it kind of foolproof for the people that are entering the information. So, for example, we have a field called issued by, and it was a blank field, so you could type in whatever you want. And it was for the driver's license for the state that it had issued it, but we ended up getting some interesting answers in that field. So we immediately switched it to a drop down, and you could only select the state. And so just those kind of typos and having some validations along the way to prevent typos and to prevent any errors, or really free typing fields, as many drop downs as possible, I figured out was the best way to go. Interfaces and firewalls was also a challenge for us that we had to overcome. Obviously, firewalls are a great thing. Maintaining security is awesome. It just took a little while to make sure, to make things go smoothly, making sure documents were filed, named correctly, and things like that. And that was thankfully OTS, our Office of Technological Services, and the people at Louisiana State Police were wonderful at working with us on that, as well as our vendor. And then lastly, I think a big challenge is tracking the out-of-state request. We did that through Google Docs, Google Sheets, and originally it was something that all of my processors did, and I've streamlined that to only one person, because it's just easier for one person to track their own actions as opposed to figuring out who within the 4 or 5 of them did what. And so I think that was probably my biggest challenge. As far as engagement, the biggest challenge was just making people trust us and really realize that we were going to do our best to create a system that kept children obviously at the top of our priority, keeping children safe, but we were also going to be very respectful of the fact that these are small businesses, and that we were going to try to make this process better for them as small business owners in the child care industry. I think that's all I have for you all today.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And I think what we're going to do with questions is we're just going to hold off till the end. If we have time, we'll try to answer some of them. And if we're able to stay on the line, or if anyone's able to stay on the line and answer those questions, that would be great. But if not, we totally understand. So again, thank you so much. But I am going to move on to our Michigan team, who will now present on their collaboration process with their state partners. So I will turn it right over to you all.
All right, thank you very much. This is Mark Jansen. I'm the Child Care Licensing Director in the state of Michigan. Lisa Brewer is in another meeting, so she allowed me to do this. So she's at risk, but I'm going to give it a whirl here. So Michigan, we really have three areas of departments that spend most of the time on this issue together: state police, Department of Education, and LARA, or licensing. And so licensing does that job, licensing, but we get about $17 million out of the $277 million that Michigan gets for the CCDBG. And so in that licensing process, we happen to be in an area that has long-term care, adult foster care, and they already do the background check. So in our review of the new law, we spent a tremendous amount of time with state police, MDE, and ourselves, and said, you know, what kind of makes sense? How are we going to make this happen? So we decided that the partnership made the most sense for LARA to do the FBI fingerprints, or kind of be the lead on that. So next slide. So we immediately met with the three areas, and LARA took the lead on changing the state law to match up with the federal law. So you all know that the fingerprinting requirements were there. We had to redefine staff. We had to deal with exclusionary offenses. So LARA met with MDE because they had a unit that also looked at some of these offenses, and we had to kind of collaborate together to come up with a very similar list, and then get them approved through state police and then ultimately through the FBI. I think for us, a lesson that I can look back on and say we learned was we really relied on all three of us together. We often had issues, and it may have taken one of us to take the lead on it, and thankfully all three departments worked really well together. And so whether it was trying to change the law, we had MDE and state police on our side, and testimony, whether we had to deal with something with the exclusionary offenses, our folks were able to work with FBI through the police. And then we also had to do annual inspections for our providers. That was another change in the law. So Michigan not only had to do work, change the background check piece of it, we were working on a lot of other pieces. And I always kind of feel like we tried to climb Mount Everest, and we would have never done it by ourselves. But with all of the collaboration, we were able to. We had to take our ratio of caseload workers down from 140 to 98. That was another piece of the changes that we had to do. Next.
So this is Cheryl Gandhi, and I'm the program analyst. So one of the big things was the new fingerprint requirement. So we collaborated with Michigan State Police. We wanted to secure a new fingerprint reason code for fingerprinting all these individuals. And other things that we worked with them on was our statutory language that we were going to use for fingerprinting the staff and the providers, making sure that that was going to align and keep us in compliance with everything. So we did not use the federal authority for fingerprinting. Providers, we used statutory authority for fingerprinting providers and staff. Another thing we collaborated with Michigan State Police on was reviewing and approving some of our proposed language and statute with regard to including language for the FBI to store and retain fingerprints in the future, so that when Michigan is able to participate in a federal wrap-back system, that we don't have to go back and get statutory changes made so that we can not have to fingerprint those individuals again and again. The other thing is that we had no access to the NCIC NSOR. That is very protected information. And so one of the things that we brought up early on with Michigan State Police was the need for us to have access to this NCIC NSOR information. And they brought the members of the team that needed to be present to discuss how that was going to work. And how we worked it out in Michigan was that when we get our Michigan State Police response back, it includes the NCIC NSOR at the bottom of it. Obviously, we wanted to let Michigan State Police know that we were going to be fingerprinting a lot more people. So we weren't exactly sure how many people were going to need to be printed. It ended up being about 85,000 new individuals fingerprinted in Michigan. And so Michigan State Police had to assure us that they were going to be on board and ready with this. And then one very important thing that we found in this whole process was that not everybody can be fingerprinted easily, especially when you're looking at family homes. You have adult household members that maybe are bedridden, have dementia, Alzheimer's, and other things that we would consider make them medically fragile. And so we went to Michigan State Police with this issue, and they trained us on how to hard card fingerprint individuals. And so a few of us were trained to go out and be able to collect hard card fingerprints on these individuals who are medically fragile. And not only did we collect them, but because we are not experts on fingerprinting people, Michigan State Police will review our fingerprint cards and do their very best to make sure that they can accept them, that we're giving them something that they can work with. So they're a little less picky with our cards probably than they would be if it was a fingerprint vendor. I'm just guessing. So, but they did train us in that. We also had collaboration with Michigan Department of Ed. We had to go through and kind of talk about how we were going to deal with these contractual staff, like your hearing and vision testers, early on workers, intermediate school districts, substitute agencies, and the impact it was going to have on contractual staff, figuring out additional fingerprint costs to them, whether they were going to need to be fingerprinted for schools and for the child care background checks. We also met with the Department of Education, their transportation staff, because there was a lot of bus drivers that were concerned that this was going to take a group of individuals that are already low-wage earners, have a lot of turnover, and make it so that they needed an additional fingerprint. We came up with a solution of redefining transportation as a component of child care licensing to reduce the number of drivers that we would need to fingerprint. And then also working with Head Start. And then we also did a lot of collaboration with our providers. We did over 70 free trainings across the state on the new background check requirements. We put out special legislative edition of our Michigan Child Care Matters and included information about the new background checks letters. And we used our consultants to go out on their interim inspections and talk to providers about that. Also with MDE coordinating is we had to kind of come up with trying to mirror what our exclusionary crimes were going to be between the licensed exempt providers and the licensed providers so that we are consistent as much as possible between those programs. We came up with a list of our exclusionary crimes. We did, for the permanent exclusions, we did add one to the permanent exclusions, which is human trafficking. And then from there, we came up with a list of 10-year, 7-year, and 5-year exclusionary crimes, because there's a lot of offenses that we were concerned about that we did not want individuals with convictions for those offenses working in our child care. And then we also do a discipline action registry check, which is we're looking to see whether or not individuals have had a license revoked with our department previously for a rule violation, and that was also a coordination with MDE where for the license exempt providers that will occur with them as well.
All right, next screen, the actual, what we call the child care background check system, it basically existed under long-term care, and the developer was it had started at MSU years ago, 12 years ago. We talked to them way back in 2016. The timeline that Valerie had is very close to what we did on almost everything. And so we started talking to him back in 2016, and basically we went ahead and developed the child care background check system built on the back of the long-term care system. And so one of the things that this developer does and did was we developed the system, but we also basically did focus groups with the providers and the software developers. He would record them as they would go through the system at MSU, and then he would get recordings of what they were thinking. He'd make them talk out loud. Basically, we made the system better and better each time we had it looked at and before we actually launched. So the licensed providers have access to the system. They're able to enter in the information they're supposed to, and then they get them set up for a background check, and then the provider has to connect and disconnect the people that are part of their licensed child care. What the system also does, which our providers love, is that you could have one person who works at 2 or 3 providers, and they can be connected to all 3 providers on our system without having to do 3 background checks. They just need the 1 background check, and so the system allows them to kind of work that way and help out the providers. Department of Education has a group called the License Exempt, and those are the folks that go into somebody's home, or maybe their relatives taking care of kids in their own home. We actually do the background checks for them for Department of Education. So again, we collaborated with them and said, hey, we already have this in place. We worked with our developer, and basically we're able to have that system tweaked a little bit so that the license exempt could be part of this. And then we created the analyst portal. Well, that was part of the original system, and that's about 6 or 7 people that do all of this processing. Like Cheryl said, we processed about 85,000 background checks between April 1st and September 30th. And that's the work of those 7 analysts. And we're now going to start reducing that group of people, because we're past that bulk of background checks. And the last thing we're working on right now is what's called the consultant portal. So I have 90 child care licensing consultants in Lara. They go out and license about 9,000 child care providers. I have asked, and we're getting a portal that those folks can go into the system, and they can go visit a site, and then the consultant can see who has been connected to that site, and then are they eligible or ineligible. So as they are looking at them from the licensing side of things, they're going to be able to tell whether the right people are in that facility. Next page. The other thing that Michigan did, which we found out, I think we're the only ones that maybe did that, but MDE and myself sat down and said, we're losing providers to the tune of 50 to 100 a month in Michigan. We were anyway. A lot of them were home providers. And so we kind of asked ourselves, how can we help some of these folks out? We know in our rural areas that's some of the best care that they can find, and maybe sometimes only care. So we went to the legislature and asked for money and got $5.5 million. And so we offered to give free background checks to our providers. So last April, we were able to do a digital coupon code in our system. And then each of the providers, if they were a center, they got 16 free ones. A group home got 8 free ones, and then a home got 6 free ones. It was all done over the system. As far as we know, we've had no fraud. We believe we have really, we just really shut the door on that. We also got a reduced price tag for the background checks. We used IDEMIA, and we were able to get a price of $50.25 total. And so we were able to, we spent about $3 million so far on the background checks to help out our providers. And the other thing we did was, because April to September was a pretty tight schedule, we did what we called mobile events with IDEMIA. And so we would bring in workers from IDEMIA to go to large entities. And Michigan has, really hundreds and hundreds of miles of rural areas. And so we would do them in large schools and allow people to be able to get their background checks at one of these mobile events. And then they would bring in the right computer and the scanner. And basically they would just take in those folks for a day or 2 days, 3 days. And then we would be able to batch them in and send them off, and they would get their background checks done. One of the things that the providers were very, very happy about. Cheryl?
So additional collaboration, Mark and I work in the licensing unit, and so we have worked very closely with developing this child care background check unit and collaborating with them, making sure that they kind of understand the policies and what needs to occur with these background checks, and put processes in place. And then we have Great Start to Quality in Michigan, and they have a program called My Registry that does training. And so we've been coordinating with them on the training and the impact of the new law and the new health and safety trainings. Great Start's been a great hostess for us when we have gone out on all these trainings around the state that we've done for free, and we couldn't have gotten to all our providers without them. And then we've also had collaboration and phone calls in Region 5 with our surrounding or our sister states. And one of the things that came out in one of the meetings was some of the frustrations that we have with getting these out-of-state background checks. And these meetings have been so helpful, because on one of the meetings we were talking about, getting background checks from Indiana, for example, and found out that we were getting our background checks done a much slower way than what we needed to. And Indiana was on that phone call, and they hooked up with us, and now we just are flying through with our background checks with Indiana. So it's been really nice to have these additional partnerships, and we appreciate all the help that we got from our sister state, Indiana, on that.
We need to move, Michigan, we need to move to the FBI. We're going to run out of time, but we're going to end on time. But then those of us who can will stay on and do questions or finish up. But let's at least give the FBI a chance to talk, and then if we can stay on, we will. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead. Sorry about all that. We should have allowed more time, because this is fascinating and so important.
Hi there, it's the FBI CJIS Division, and we agree that this conversation has been very beneficial and interesting to hear. My name is Marissa Barron, and I'm an analyst at the FBI CJIS Division, and I have with me today Christy Kirkwood and Anissa Drabish. First, we'd just like to thank the HHS for including us on this call. Again, like I said, it has been very interesting, and we are learning as well. As you know, the FBI serves as the National Criminal History Record Repository, so that is why we're joining today, to provide an overview of the National Fingerprint File program. And I'd also like to take a minute to recognize Ms. Leslie Moore, of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. She's also the Vice Chair of the National Crime Prevention and Privacy Compact Council, so she is joining us here today, and her state also participates in the National Fingerprint File program, so we want to thank her for joining the call. And at that time, I'm going to turn it over to Christy, and she's going to give an overview of the National Fingerprint File program.
Thank you, Marissa. Good afternoon. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Next Generation Identification, which we refer to as the NGI system, is the FBI's automated biometric identification and criminal history record reporting system. The NGI system serves as the avenue for criminal history record data sharing and integration across the country. Within the NGI system is an index pointer system that ties computerized criminal history record files of the FBI and the centralized files maintained by each state into a national system. The NGI system uses the pointers to direct searches to records maintained by state agencies. These pointers also indicate whether a state or the FBI is responsible for the maintenance and dissemination of the various portions of the criminal history record. By establishing this system exchange, the goal is to make available the most up-to-date criminal history records. So for a matter of information, all states voluntarily send arrest information to the FBI for inclusion in the national database. States agree to make its criminal history records available for criminal justice purposes. However, a state is not required to make its criminal history records available for non-criminal justice purposes until such a time that the state ratifies the National Crime Prevention and Privacy Compact Act of 1998, which we refer to as the Compact, and then participates in the National Fingerprint File program, which we refer to as the NFS program, through either the traditional NFS method or the alternate NFS method. The Compact, when ratified by a state, supersedes any conflicting state laws. This allows for uniform dissemination among states while ensuring that each state will eventually participate in the NFS program. States that ratify the Compact must make all criminal history record information except for sealed information available in response to authorized non-criminal justice purposes within 1 year of ratification of the Compact. For those states that have not yet to ratify the Compact or cannot release state-maintained criminal history record information for non-criminal justice purposes, the FBI will respond on the state's behalf with any state-maintained criminal history record information available in the national database. The NFS participation is the final stage of decentralization of the criminal history records. When the decentralization of criminal history records began in 1978, the NFS was the ultimate goal. An NFS participant is a compact signatory that has agreed to provide its criminal history records for all authorized uses, including non-criminal justice licensing and employment purposes. As states continue to ratify the Compact and to participate in the NFS program, criminal history records requested for the non-criminal justice purposes will be obtained directly from the state, thus providing a more up-to-date criminal history record. While a non-NFS state may choose to respond to non-criminal justice requests, they are not required to do so. For example, during a background check today, when an identification is made on a non-NFS state record, or the state does not support the purpose code associated with the fingerprint submission, the FBI provides a copy of the state's records kept on file within the NGI system. This record copy may not contain all the criminal history record information as the record residing in the state repository. When this record check is being done on an individual providing care for the elderly, for children, or the disabled, their safety may be compromised. NFS participating states are required to respond to record requests for all authorized non-criminal justice purposes. Therefore, the FBI ceases to maintain duplicate criminal history record data for these states, but continues to retain the fingerprints. As the NFS participating states do not submit supporting documentation to the FBI, such as subsequent arrests, expungement requests, disposition reports, and death notices, the NFS participating states must meet certain qualification requirements to ensure NFS program participation. Participation in the NFF program ensures a higher level of security benefiting our most vulnerable populations. There are currently 20 states that participate in the NFF program, and I believe there may be a copy of the map on the screen, and all of those states that are indicated in yellow are the NFF states. And this map is also available at the FBI.gov website. And another valuable resource that tells you a little bit more about NFF is the NFF benefits brochure, and it is also available at that website. And I think they might be able to display it on the screen for you as well. That is all we have today, but if there's time for questions, we will be available for questions.
It's Shannon. What I'd like to do, because I know our Principal Deputy Secretary, Assistant Secretary Steve Wagner's on the line, is let him speak for a minute, and then we can officially end, and people who can stay on, and all of us from the Office of Child Care can stay, and I don't know how many presenters. So that would be okay. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Wagner, who has been a great leader on this project.
Great. Shannon, can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Okay, good. Steve Wagner here. Shannon indicated I'm currently the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at ACF, and it's been my great pleasure to work with Shannon for 2 years on this very challenging background check requirement. I want to start by congratulating her and the outstanding staff at the Office of Child Care for the really diligent work that they put into this. I wanted to be with you for the whole conversation, but our secretary convened a management retreat this afternoon, so I had to step away for that. But as you've discussed, this is an extremely daunting requirement that was put in place in 2014 because it requires the cooperation of at least 3 different state entities: the Child Care Subsidy Agency, the Child Welfare or Child Protective Service Agency, and the Criminal Justice Point of Contact for the FBI's fingerprint system. And we're just so thrilled that so many could join today, and thrilled and very gratified by your willingness to help us solve the problem of providing high-quality fingerprint-based background checks. Because I know all of us agree that protecting kids and other vulnerable persons whom we serve is our #1 priority. And as Shannon has pointed out, you know, the requirement was applied to the Child Care and Development Block Grant maybe first, but it is the wave of the future. These background check requirements are going to be applied to virtually every other social service delivery program, and so it's certainly in all of our interests to get it right now, not only because we want to protect our kids, but because we're going to be called upon to implement background checks in numerous other areas going forward. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, and again to Shannon and her team at the Office of Child Care for convening this discussion. And please be assured that we are committed to doing everything we can to help states and our partners meet the background check requirements that are written into law. All the best, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. You know, we keep changing our mind here because we had so much more to say than we had time to say it. But what I think we'd like to do is let OPRE speak, because they had prepared remarks just for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then we're going to schedule a follow-up call and for questions, and give people the option, if we can pull everybody back together, to get those answered in more depth, because I think it would be worthwhile. And I can tell the numbers are dropping. People have other commitments. So we can stay on for 10 minutes, but I think we should do a real catch-up call separately. Okay, so OPRE for a couple minutes, then we'll stay here and answer a couple of questions, but then we'll do something else in more depth.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Blankenship, and I am in the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation in the Administration for Children and Families. And in case you're unfamiliar with OPRE, we're the research arm of ACF, and our office conducts rigorous research and evaluation of ACF programs and the populations we serve. So I just very quickly today wanted to take some time to introduce you to one of the new projects that we're working on that is investigating the implementation of the interstate component of the background checks requirements for childcare. So this project has two main goals. Primarily, we're interested in gaining a better understanding of the challenges states are facing with implementation of specifically the interstate components of the background checks requirements, and to identify promising practices or solutions to support states' implementation. And we're particularly interested in identifying solutions that can be coordinated or supported at the federal level. Next slide, please. So this is a 3-year contract that was awarded to our contractor CNA in September 2018. And we have a number of activities planned that will be rolled out in phases over the next 3 years. I was planning to give a little bit more detail about these activities, but given that we're short on time, I will just let you read them here and ask for the next slide. So our next activity that we are beginning to collect data for, hopefully within the next few weeks, is the environmental scan. And this will be a series of surveys and interviews with all 56 states and territories. It will begin with a web-based survey that will go out to the CCDF lead agencies in every state and territory, and that will be followed up with interviews with the lead agency and the data custodians for the criminal history repositories, the child abuse and neglect registries, and the sex offender registries, in addition to additional stakeholders at the state and national level. And so our primary goal here is to just get a better understanding of what states' background check processes are and what the challenges that they're encountering are. And hopefully we'll be able to use this information to be able to generate more directed training and technical assistance opportunities to help states come into full compliance with the law. So I just wanted to give a very quick overview of that activity, and we will be reaching out to states, specifically our contractor CNA will be reaching out to states in the next couple of weeks. And we're hopeful that if you are the person who gets contacted in your state, that you will be willing to help us with this effort so that we can help you from the federal level. And I know we don't have time for questions now, but if anybody has any questions about this effort, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the slide, or the core on the project, Meryl Borofsky.
No. Okay, thank you. I think we should let people who want to go, but I think we can, if somebody has something quick and pressing that is something that the Office of Child Care can answer.
Well, this is
like I see a couple things that are really directed at us.
Yeah, there's a couple I think we can answer. One was, did I hear you correctly, Shannon, that there are 37 states who are fully compliant?
No,
and that was
fingerprint, right?
There are 37 states that are doing the end-state checks and the FBI fingerprint checks for new staff.
So they're compliant with that.
Yes.
But that's not everything.
With a part of it. And there was a question, that says, it is their understanding, let's see, hold on here. Can you confirm that we don't have to complete the criminal repository check of places where the applicant has lived in the preceding 5 years if the applicant has disclosed residence in a National Fingerprint File state? And that is correct. If the other state where they resided within the past 5 years is an NFF state, you do not have to do a separate interstate check of that criminal repository. If that would be covered by the FBI fingerprint check. So I think with that, Teresa's going to offer some closing remarks, and we're going to look for an opportunity where we can answer some of the other questions in another forum.
But as quickly as possible, so we don't forget that we care.
Yes, So as Shannon just mentioned, we were thinking as we were kind of going over time, which we apologize, that hopefully we'll try to put together a peer-to-peer session or a peer learning session where maybe folks can have more time to ask questions of Michigan and Louisiana. So we'll be reaching out to those states again. We so appreciate everyone taking the time to participate, but also a special thank you to the states and to the FBI and OPRE for taking the time to present to us. And next time we'll be better prepared with more time available.
Okay, what about the person who asked for a transcript of what the FBI representative said? Do we have a way to get that?
The webinar will be recorded and posted on their website.
Okay. Well, then maybe we could transcribe it from that, because otherwise they're just going to have to take notes, listen to it real fast again. But yeah, okay, so we have it. We can get that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.